If you carry a firearm and discharge your weapon in self-defense, you could face hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees and expenses. So carry the protection of CCW Safe, Self-Defense Legal Services membership. Upfront payment of all criminal and civil defense costs with no out-of-pocket for members.
And we are back. I'm Chris Evans, the CEO of Survival Dispatch, joined tonight by my good friend Khalid Muhammad, directly below me from Command 11, affectionately known inside Survival Dispatch News as 008. And beside me, you asked for Sarah Adams. Khalid has delivered. Great to see you, Sarah. I appreciate your time very, very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And
not sure where Mike Glover is just this minute, but he does have a young family. We've got time zone differences and whatnot. I suspect he'll show up here before too long. So tonight we're going to be discussing building the red cell mindset. And the theme is essentially mental preparedness and situational wargaming. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much gear you have. If you go into condition black, your mind collapses, your DRT right there. So you're going to learn from some professionals tonight on how to do these things. Oh, and I just heard in the background, Mike, how you doing?
Hey, what's up, guys? I had a power outage.
Hey, Mike.
Excuses. What kind of
you
prep?
Call the agency. They set that up. They must have known that I was going on.
Totally. Or it's the Chinese. The Chinese control all the power grids now.
I appreciate you making it, Mike. Thank you very much. And for those of you who are not familiar with Mike Glover, I don't know where you've been, but Mike's a good friend of mine, former Green Beret, former CIA GRS operative as well. So yeah, we absolutely have a stacked panel here tonight. So before we dive into the red cell stuff, Sarah, I want you to speak to the, I don't know, is it a book or a white paper that you did yesterday on Abbey Gate that you released?
Yeah, it was just like our investigation. So it's just like about 20 some pages, and it walks through like the plotting behind Abbey Gate and who did what when in the lead up to the bombing, right? Which terrorists manned the gates, which terrorists secured the airport, which terrorists secured actual Kabul, who sat in the Fatwa meeting to approve the plot, that type of thing. And so it walks through each stage, I think, which is really interesting for people to see, because this is only 14-ish days of planning, right? And just to see how detailed they were in that small amount of time. And then we compare that to Al-Qaeda's upcoming plot that they started planning in 2022, and they've had 3 years of that level of planning. You know, it's really important to kind of understand that. And this is just a small snapshot that people should pay attention to.
That's very sobering indeed. And I just put the link to the PDF out in the live chat. I think it went out to 8 out of the 9 destinations. Sarah, forgive me for asking, but were you in theater when Benghazi happened?
Yeah, well, I flew that morning to Europe for a meeting, and then I came back the next day, and of course had to serve the rest of my tour in Tripoli because, you know, we pulled out of Benghazi. So I was in Libya for a good chunk, almost all of 2012, except in the summer. I went like to the Olympics, and then I did some traveling like to Egypt and stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Mike, you were in the general vicinity of Libya at the time, correct?
Yeah, I was in the Delta Force compound the day before and the day of September 11th of 2012. I was supposed to do a key leader engagement with Ambassador Stevens and the team lead that was running the counterterrorism program there. And then I went up deploying 2 weeks later to Libya and was the 1208 team lead for a congressionally mandated counterterrorism program on the ground. So I was the TL for what's called Team Libya. And that's where I first ran into Sarah overseas with, I think Flounder was the team lead of the GRS guys there. But yeah, then I spent 6 months on the ground doing the 1208 and then helping task force with the targeting of Abu Ghatala, the guy who was responsible for the coordination and then we winded up handing it over to another team from 10th Special Forces Group, and then Task Force later rolled that guy up.
If you don't mind, before we move on, could you explain to our audience the transition from being a Green Beret to a CIA global, what's it called? Global
response staff.
Response staff. Yeah, maybe you could bridge that for our audience.
Yeah, so there are various versions of it. Without getting into too many details, basically I worked for the agency and I was typically recruited that way, but I was actually recruited for Ground Branch in Libya. And then a sequester happened, which did a stop loss. And they said, hey, you could contract for GRS in the interim, because I wanted to be a full-time paramilitary operations officer. And I mean, that was my goal. I had done everything I'd done in the military to be that. And so there I met a guy who had a call sign who was part of Benghazi, who said, hey, man, this is something you should think about doing. And I always had it top of mind. And then when it didn't work out with Ground Branch, I decided to contract with GRS and winded up spending some time in a few countries. And for me, I was a reserve sergeant major in 19th Special Forces Group. At the same time, I was a GRS contractor. So it was really weird, because I come back from Yemen, put on a uniform, and then go to Africa, and then come back from Africa. And the reality was I was very busy, more busy than I was on active duty, actually. But it was a really good transition. And to be in GRS, especially working directly, they call them directs, is the actual name. You have to have a profound experience in special operations and be very senior. So you could be a subcontractor for Blackwater or SOC or these companies, but to be a direct and move personnel like Sarah around, you have to know what you're doing, essentially. And so it was an easy transition. The vetting process is very difficult, but what I found is some of the best men I've ever served with were in that capacity, including friends like Sean Ryan, who I met for the first time in Yemen in that job.
Yeah, that's awesome. So just to put a simple point on it, my understanding is, as a GRS operative, your job was to protect assets, especially people like Sarah. Is that correct?
Yeah, protect CIA personnel
Okay.
in high-risk environments.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So just a 2-second shout out to Mission First today. They did a fantastic job of keeping everybody up to date on the shooting today. So I just wanted to give them a quick nod before we go any further. But Sarah and Khalid, I want to come to both of you to speak to the Al-Qaeda airline plot first and foremost, and what that threat looks like here in America now. So Sarah and then Khalid, please.
Sure. I focus a lot on the airline plot because I think it's the easiest piece of the plot to thwart, because we control the space, right? We control the airports. So think about it this way, like the plot is very large, it's very far along, it's going to happen, right? So we have to minimize deaths, affect their timeline, and then cause issues within what they're planning to do. So one is the airline plot. And so basically what Al-Qaeda plans to do is, it's a 30-year anniversary of Bojinka, and it was a plot they had well before 9/11, and it was supposed to be 12 airliners of the Trans-Pacific. It only got thwarted because there was a fire in Ramzi Yusuf's apartment. They went in, looked at the apartment, they found the plans, and actually thwarted it only 2 weeks before. So now the new age version is just 12 airliners over the US soil, and the airliners are going to be taken down by suicide bombers. Now, the US government has the technology to stop the bombs from entering into the airport, but they won't effectively use the technology. So the technology is the millimeter wave scanner. And so what we've been proposing is make it mandatory, at least try to get it all in place by, like Halloween, end of October. And so everyone needs to go through the millimeter wave scanner in the United States. And if they came from a small airport in, like, let's say in the Midwest, and then you go into Chicago and you didn't go through the small airport, you need to go through to the big airport. This way, we keep the suicide bomb off the large body airliners, which they want to get the most people. So the plot is going to kill If it goes as planned, about 4,000 people. If you stop the bombs, you save at least 3,000, because at the end of the day, the terrorists are going to have to probably try to get insiders. So some bombs will get through because of an insider, but you're going to save it thousands of people. And when you have to use an insider, think about it. You now brought someone else into the plot. It's someone else who might tip somebody off. It's someone else who might get cold feet, etc. So that's what we're just trying to do. Impose restrictions on Al-Qaeda to make the plot harder for them.
So for starters, you must not have got the memo from Sebastian Gorka. There's no threat. There's no threat to America at all, just in case you didn't get that memo.
Yeah, I can't believe he hasn't been fired yet, but here we are.
That's a deep rabbit hole. I won't take us down. Sarah, are you referring to these so-called undetectable suicide vests? Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, just to keep it very simple, all this is the evolution of the underwear bomb. So if you know what the underwear bomb is, this is just the underwear bomb sewn into clothing. Now, that's what's going to be used on airplanes, and then the larger version will be used to get in secure buildings. But I think a lot of people think that's the only bomb. So I do want to make it very clear. There's still going to be regular suicide vests. There's going to be IEDs. There's going to be vehicle bombs for the ground attacks. This is going to almost be like a war zone with how many IEDs are going to be involved on the ground. So I think a lot of people stay focused on the airline and forget there's a lot of other bombs in place. So I just want to be very clear about that. This just goes in a secure environment.
I appreciate that very much. Khalid, could you speak to the ISIS component of this, these small, complex, coordinated attacks like Mumbai and Paris?
Yeah, it's like we've been talking about. I mean, in the last series, we talked in detail about how this attack was going to be carried out. What ISIS has worked out is 10 to 15 cities, tier 2 cities in the US that have a tier 1 trauma center. The amount of fear, the amount of attack they can carry out, because police forces are limited, SWAT teams are limited, the amount of time it'll take to move resources from major cities to back up the local police force gives them enough time to carry out a mass casualty event and get control of the hospital. And that's where the entire game is played, is from the hospital. The idea behind it, like Sarah was saying, the number of IEDs that are involved, vehicle bombs that are involved, this is all your ground assault. We are looking at what was going on back in Iraq being brought to the US, and a war zone created inside the US on the ground. And at the same time, you've got Al-Qaeda hijacking planes. It's the kind of pandemonium, the kind of mayhem we're going to see is something the US has never seen before. And the number of people that still to this day believe this cannot happen here. They're living in a dream world. Al-Qaeda is telling you we're going to do it. ISIS is telling you we're going to do it. The Taliban is telling you we're going to do it. And you're still saying it's not going to happen. That's not going to help you. It's not going to help you. And it's not going to help the people you're telling it's not going to happen. Because when it does happen, you're not going to be ready for it. And you're going to be the first among the casualties.
Yeah, it's very disconcerting. So Sarah first, and then Mike, I'd like to hear both of your opinions on the mess that Obama, Biden, and Milley left in Afghanistan and essentially armed our enemies. And now we've got Afghanistan as like terrorist training camp central with our weapons. So Sarah, maybe you could speak to that first.
Sure. I really worry less about the weapons because they have now billions of dollars and can buy any weapons they want. And since August, Qatar's been taking in like 2 plane loads a week of weapons because there's so many terrorists in the country. So don't focus as much on the weapons. You need to focus on the training facilities we left behind. So all the terrorists now in the world are traveling to Afghanistan because it has the best simulators, the best shoot houses. They're training in former CIA and JSOC facilities, right? So think about the capability. The other problem is we have not done an over-the-horizon strike in Afghanistan since July 2022. They have no fear of being struck. They've been able to plot, plan, train, deploy, right? So we have to keep that in mind. And then, of course, they've created this Islamic Army structure, which really should scare the crap out of people. You know, when Khalid told you there's like going to be these ISIS ground teams, like 5 to 10 man, Do you know the 5 to 10 men are not ISIS? The 5 to 10 men come from 6 to 7 different terrorist groups, because the bodies in those teams are Islamic Army. And they did that because the United States, you focus on ISIS, you focus on Al-Qaeda, you focus on Lashkar-e-Taiba. And Americans won't be able to combine these 8 or 9 people together and realize they're a cell, because we don't collect that way. It's brilliant.
Wow, that's crazy. I've just got a short X post up here that with the huge stockpile equipment left by the U.S., of course, I understand your comments on that. Terrorists have today built a black army and are armed to the teeth. The Taliban, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, Jais al-Adil, ETIM, and IMU, and dozens of other terrorist groups have gathered under one flag. Mike, I want to hear your thoughts on the training assets that Sarah spoke to, and how that compares to what they had when you were in theater in the past versus where they've been taken to now.
Yeah, I started in Afghanistan pretty early in the global war on terror, where before there was an Afghan National Army, and we called them ASF, essentially a partisan force that were attached to us that we trained up to become border police or Afghan National Army, or just police officers in their community. And they had rudimentary tactics. It was all basic FM 7-8, small unit movements. They understood convoys and basic procedures, and they were using AK-47s. You know, we had them jingled out like with different color tape and all these beautiful things. I even had my own AK built that way. Fast forward a decade, in one of my rotations in Afghanistan, I was part of the training process of the Afghan Partnering Unit, a unit of Afghans that were trained by Tier 1 forces. I mean, RRD, the Ranger Regiment Detachment, which is a Tier 1 unit and a member of Joint Special Operations Command, started training these guys, assess, train them, and to develop them into a Tier 1 fighting force. I mean, essentially, they were part of a bipartisan tactic or a bilateral tactic in going into places where we had a host nation face on very significant high-value targets that were being hit and struck around the area. I was in Kunduz at the time, and we were rolling in Kunduz and Mazar Sharif. And I was impressed because not only were these guys very competent and educated, I remember even some of the guys, the leadership we were sending to our own schools, like Ranger School. You know, I went to Ranger School as an 18-year-old private. These guys were getting trained because they wanted to learn planning processes. And like Sarah, expanding on Sarah's point, the equipment is not the biggest threat. The biggest threat is the capacity they have, which is endless, and now the capability they've built based on planning protocols and understanding how to do complex operations. I imagine even the Afghan leadership that I helped evacuate after this debacle that took place, I was using nonprofits and CIA personnel that were friendly to me and friendly to the circumstance, and helping us get allies out under basically underground railroads. I mean, we were basically using rat lines and a lot of the underground capability we had built in country. A lot of guys transitioned. And so they were basically told, if you don't support us and you don't get on the bandwagon, you're just going to die. And so there are some guys, including leadership, that are now in charge, and they understand everything about complex asymmetrical warfare. And that's more scary for me.
Yeah, that's insane. So I have a general question for all three of you. I'll go Sarah, Clean, back to you, Mike. I like your thoughts on the capabilities that our enemies now have juxtaposed to our law enforcement agencies here in America at all levels, city PD to feds and in between.
Sure. I mean, most of the terrorists that came here trained on two different things that we've seen: advanced urban warfare or suicide bomber training. And the suicide bomber training is 6 months. I really hope a lot of people understand how long that is. Now, the other problem is just what they're going to use, right? So we have fully automatic weapons that were brought in. I told you a host of IEDs. We have like vehicle IEDs, right, which we don't see here. We have suicide bombers. We have the type of vehicles that you attach to the bottom. I mean, bombs you attach to the bottom of the vehicles. Simple things like pipe bombs. So the level that they're bringing here. You don't see this in America. Obviously, Mike has served in a war zone, so he's seen all these kind of bombs, but our law enforcement have not seen these. And even when I go meet law enforcement now, a lot of them are young. Like they weren't even here for 9/11, right? They never served in a war zone, so they have a lot to learn of what these things do. And the negative is some of these IEDs have chemicals in them, and these are very concerning hazmat situations. And our local law enforcement does not deal with hazmat situations. They call someone in for it. So we're going to get a lot of fatalities in the second waves of this because people are not prepared for what's in these bombs.
Wow, that's crazy. Khalid, I'd like to hear your opinion of how we look versus the bad guys.
Well, I've seen how the bad guys look because I've seen them train in Afghanistan and I've seen them operate in Pakistan. The level we are looking at, even with the Pakistani military, it is almost on par with one another. I mean, their training is on level with our commandos in Pakistan, and that's our special forces. To think of it from that point of view, that you have the level of training that maybe a SEAL team would have, a Rangers team would have, a Green Beret team would have, and you're going up against law enforcement. This is a bloodbath. I mean, we've talked about this in the past, but the level, the concept of warfare that these guys understand now is completely beyond anything we've ever seen in the US. Active shooters, multi-shooters, these are things we've seen. I mean, Columbine was 2 shooters, but they didn't accomplish what they planned on accomplishing. These are people that are going in with the intent that they will die. They're not concerned with whether they come out of it alive. They are going in with the intent of how many casualties can I rack up? How great can we make the propaganda video for the next group that we recruit?
Wow. So, Mike, I think I read that the FBI have 4 HRT teams across the country that get deployed if we have, a hostage situation. But that wouldn't cover, obviously, 10 to 15 tier 2 cities. Do we even have enough guys at Delta level that could, be parachuted into 10 to 15 cities and take these guys on?
Yeah, one of the reasons it's an elite organization is because the assessment and selection process is stringent. It's very difficult to assess the best, essentially, and then it's a funnel. It gets back to the tip of the spear, essentially, if I could use that analogy, which I've used too many times today, I feel like. At the tip of the spear is a very small number of operators and enablers that do these operations. That's direct action centric, hostage rescue included in that. The overall problem is you don't have enough capability. You don't have enough transportation elements. I mean, I can tell you that from personal experience, even in deploying rapidly in training exercises, you lose one aircraft, you lose the entire operation because you can't transport all the enablers, all the equipment that's necessary to do a complex operation, even reacting to bad guys. One last caveat that I think is significant and was brought up about the suicide component to this. The first time that I remember we did call outs as a tactic, I was surprised. Tom DiTommaso, who was B Squadron's commander, had told us that we would be doing a new tactic, the call out. And I'm like, is that a pro word for some advanced top secret action? Like, what do we do? Some secret thing, right? No. He means literally we're calling them out. And when you had a person who was AQ affiliated and likely to clack themselves off, we would do a call out and we would literally call them out in Arabic. This is mostly done in Iraq in my operations. And we would call them out. And if they didn't come out, we would throw a flashbang. If they didn't come out then, we would throw a grenade. If we didn't come out then, we would drop a bomb on the house. And the point of that is we had rules of escalation and laws that basically supported and facilitated operations against suicide bombers. Now, from personal experience, when I transitioned out of the military, California, the post-certified components of California training law enforcement asked me to train officers in that potential threat. Like, what would we do? Yeah, we come into a room and we shoot them in the face, right? It's like, no, that's not even the start point. Like, you would back off Do you have the rules of escalation? Do you know how to throw a flashbang? Have you used a thermobaric grenade? Have you put a dog in the house to let him go through? A drone, whatever it is, when you're facing somebody who's willing to take their own lives, the rules of engagement change completely. And so that's the overall problem. It's not just like the individual tactic or technique that's required against an aggressor who has a clacker in his hand and a vest on his chest. It's what are you going to do as an operational unit when you're deploying a SWAT team and you realize there's multiple suicide bombers on target? A patrol officer would arrive and say, call SWAT. Is a SWAT team going to arrive and say, call Delta? Well, guess what? There's not enough operators in the building that are going to be able to facilitate this on a massive scale or a larger scale.
Wow, it's crazy. So before we move on, Sarah, there's a question from the audience. I think you're best equipped to answer it. So Survival Dispatch News, how about a shot at answering why Leo and government agents with guns are not paying attention to these threats you all are claiming are imminent?
Yeah, the problem is law enforcement and even the state level take their leads from the federal government because the federal government hasn't issued the terrorism threat warning for this. They're kind of like sitting on their hands. Now, we're not going to say all are doing that. The Southeast United States, we've met with law enforcement in Florida, Georgia, North and South Carolina, Alabama, Tennessee. These states are very, very forward leaning and getting ahead of this threat, but other states are just kind of, ignoring it or waiting for the federal government to tell them to prepare. And that's very, very dangerous. Like, no one's coming to save you. This is your responsibility. If you signed up to protect your community, you need to get ahead of this and start doing what you need to do to protect your community.
Good. Thanks, Sarah. So quick question for all three of you. So President Trump's officially signed an executive order to create the National Rapid Response Task Force, a dedicated unit of the National Guard that can be dispatched to any city in the United States within 1 hour to suppress riots or leftist insurrections. Mike, I'm going to go to you first, and then Clete, I'll come to you. And the reason I'm going to Mike first is because, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't at one point in time when things were going down in DC in the past couple of weeks, you posited that it could potentially be, getting prepared for more than just cleaning the city up, or am I thinking of someone else?
Yeah, that wasn't me.
Okay. But thoughts on this QRF team?
I think it's an effective strategy as long as, the line of funding and support and capability is follow through, because I've seen this good idea ferry my entire military career, and it usually doesn't accompany a line of funding that's going to support the idea. And the problem in that is you're going to need a lot more capability, and you're going to need more support for something. I mean, we all saw Team America, right? This is basically the Team America concept. I mean, essentially you have a national mission force that is designed domestically to deploy. Well, in a broad scale, it has to be the National Guard. I mean, unless the federal government creates another entity for hostage rescue, specific DA requirements to include high-risk warrants or terrorism operations, it's FBI HRT. They're the national mission force for domestic circumstance. And there are regional SWAT teams, but again, this seemingly will not just be a DA problem, a direct action problem. It could be containment. It could be sweeping a city for a WMD. It could be a whole multitude of things. So I would love to have been the operations sergeant major for that organization, because again, a lot of gears start spinning in my head about what needs to be done. But the default is like a National Guardsman with a rifle. That's not what this should be. It should be drone technology. It should be SIGINT capability. It should be all these things that there's a lot of expertise in this room. And I would say, I guess, in the National Guard. It's been a while since I was in the National Guard, but I think it's a good idea. And I think essentially it's the only option on the table with something very massive that we're potentially talking about that's going to happen in the near future.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Good. Khalid, your thoughts on this National Guard, QRF, and overall defense against these guys?
Well, look, the National Guard is a great idea, but that really isn't. They're not trained to be able to fight these terrorists. That's the biggest problem here. You are talking about tactically sound people. I mean, this is Delta level. This is Ranger level, and the National Guard is not. They're just going to be bodies to drop. Whether it be local law enforcement, sheriff department, FBI, to get to that level of understanding, these are all GWAT guys. You need a team of GWAT vets that you bring in, put in play, and let them run a team. If you put National Guard, this quick reaction force, under 2 or 3 GWAT vets and let them train them, then they can be effective. But as long as they go on their base training, they're not going to have any success. They're just going to end up being in a firing line and being shot out. I hate saying it that way, but again, the U.S. law enforcement is built to protect a neighborhood. Criminals, drug dealers, that's what they're taught. The FBI is taught hostage rescue. Beyond that, you don't have a terrorist level. You don't understand, like Mike was saying, you have no idea how to deal with a suicide bomber. You have no idea to handle a multi-pronged attack. That you've got 5 or 6 teams moving within a city. Where do you go first? That's where your GWAT guys make sense to be the ones training.
Yeah,
So
and can I add to that really quick?
Absolutely.
So yeah, as they're pointing out, National Guard is not a tier 1 unit. I know it's rude to say, but in this case, it's not going to be effective. Also, they can say it's going to deploy in an hour. I've been in the government 16 years. I've never seen a DoD unit deploy in an hour. That's a lie. Now, there is an alternative solution that we're building here in the state of Florida, and it's the Florida State Guard. They are taking a lot of people with this former background in, Afghanistan, Syria, and Iraq. And then the governor of Florida is giving them approvals, legal authorities to work the counterterrorism mission. So we do have a deployment force in our states of capable people to help supplement law enforcement. Even National Guard, they're going to come and supplement law enforcement. They're not going to be the lead on this. So there are other models people should be considering taking advantage of. And like Mike said, Florida actually has a very robust budget because they're very good at handling their money. So they can fund something like this. And that is what matters, is the money behind it.
No, I appreciate that. That's probably about the only thing I've heard recently on this topic. Makes me feel good since we're here in Florida. But Sarah, just to throw a wrench into things, I would love to hear your opinion on this. Mike and Cleet as well. So there's a long history of these radical Islamic jihadis dressing up as first responders. I mean, even as recently as 10/7, they told people they were dressed up as Israeli officers and said, it's not safe to leave. These are the people who are paying attention. They got to the parking lot, they got in their cars, then they got slaughtered in their cars. But there's another piece of this as well. We just did a deep dive into break-ins at National Guard armories around the country. And it's been going on for my entire life, 50 years, on a regular basis. There's been all kinds of Senate committees on this, of how it should be fixed. It's not being fixed. Recently, there was $3,000 in National Guard uniforms stolen from a location in Tennessee. There were 3 armories that were broken into back to back. There was an armory in Southern California where they stole 3 Humvees. One of them is armored. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are as far as, not only are these guys trained at a much higher level than we've ever faced, especially law enforcement, officers, but what about when you throw that into the mix, where in the heat of the moment, people are trying to be tasked with figuring out, is that a real cop? Is that a real National Guard? Like, I'd love to hear all 3 of your thoughts. I'll start with you, Sarah.
Yeah, when you talk about those Humvees, I mean, they abandoned the 2 unarmored, but nobody's found the armored one, which is very concerning. But the way they did in Israel, like you said, they just dressed, as first responders. We do believe that's a piece of this plot. But think of how complicated this is. So they might look like first responders. We're going to have first responders. Every different organization is going to rush in and be a first responder. And then GWAT people are going to step up and rush in and be a first responder. So you're going to have a very hard time determining who's the bad guy, who's the good guy. And so what we've been telling local law enforcement in our briefings is, take the time now to at least talk to the local veterans in your community that you think are going to respond, and make the private-public partnership now. So at least when people are responding, you know each other, you have a plan to work together, so that narrows down to who you don't know and who you need to identify, who could be the enemy in these uniforms and have weapons like you, have gear like you. Remember, it's not just the gear they're stealing here. They're also filtering some of the gear back in from Afghanistan, the property of the US government guns, you know, kind of thing, some of the night vision. So, you know, you have to keep that in mind. They will look like us. If you see some of these Taliban videos, because it's hard to get the Al-Qaeda camp ones, there's a few posted, they look like us. It's really hard. Even the way they move, right? So I think it's going to be very alarming for law enforcement to kind of make that decision. And we're going to have a lot of people die because they're going to assume it's a friendly.
So a friend of mine who's fairly well known, he's very well known, but I'm not going to mention his name because I don't want to open that can of worms. But he said to me that he's been asked by a lot of SWAT teams, and this particular individual has served on SWAT teams, been a leader on SWAT teams, has trained SWAT teams for decades. And he said his recommendation, because he keeps all these former students and coworkers are coming to him saying, what do we do when this happens? And his advice to them is carry your kit in your car, put it on, pull out one of your old plate carriers or vests that says police on it, take the charge for being impersonating a cop, just get in the fight and do something. If you want to help, that's the best way to help. That's his opinion. I'm not qualified to speak to that, but maybe you could quickly speak to that before Clede and Mike weigh in.
Oh, I'll let Mike handle this one.
Well, Mike, before you go, could you also mention, in years gone by when you were in theater and you saw somebody at night wearing, you know, full panoramic NVGs, what was your reaction when you saw them as far as fight or flight, and what's that reaction look like now?
You mean friend from foe, identifying friend from foe?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, when you work in a tight-knit organization that constantly trains together, I could tell by the way somebody moves from their knees down, the way their stride is with their boots, on who it was. I could tell mannerisms. I could read behavioral indications based on just movement that would tell me who was good and who was bad. Now, there are a lot of scary situations that I've been in where we've almost had incidents. There have been instances of fratricide or friendly fire because of misidentification. It's a problem. Identifying friend from foe in daylight is a problem. At night, it's super complex. There are specific things, for example, that operators do that are telltales on uniforms, and I won't even begin to describe them because there are specific things that we do that are telltales to identify friend from foe. And if you're in a situation where you see guys running around and they don't have specific identifications because you're part of an organization, well, they might be a foe or they might be a friendly. And the complexity of this domestic circumstance is just what you described. Say a responsible citizen is what I call him, a good Samaritan, decides to get involved, and he thinks he's doing the right thing, and he dons on kit, and I arrive on the scene, and I see a dude running around with a carbine who looks like he's trying to get in the fight or part of the fight. He might be misidentified. And you're going to have lots of instances of that, which is why I tell my recommendation, just based on the follow-up of your question, is don't get involved if you don't have to. Because your place is not to dynamically dominate the X. Leave that to the professionals. It's to protect yourself, your family, and your community. So if this is popping off in metropolitan Salt Lake City, you don't need to grab your kit and your gun and go run to Salt Lake City. You need to be standing at the threshold of your door. Better yet, reseated in the confines of your home with barricaded behind an obstacle, shooting through a loophole at your front door. That's where you should be, not getting involved or trying to be and I hate to use the term hero because there is a time and place, especially in the immediate after action of an attack. But man, it's going to be a really dynamic situation, especially if it's at night. If it's at night, I'll tell you, because I train law enforcement SWAT teams across the country, they don't have the capability. And we use the term when I grew up in the infantry before I went SF, is we own the night, right? 160th, their motto is we own the night, or night stalkers is what they're called. It's because they fly helicopters with night vision, and nobody else really does that. Well, imagine a situation where the bad guys have nods, they have MVGs, and nobody else has it. With an infrared laser that's zeroed to their weapon system, game over. I mean, they're going to slaughter law enforcement. So, and lastly, if you're hearing this and you're an agency, figure out a way. There's a DRMO. There's a whole bunch of programs where you can get MVGs, get the training. I'll come and train you for free to be able to get that capability, because if you don't have it, you're just going to be a victim.
So, Khalid, before you go, just want to quickly mention, you tweaked me, Mike. We were testing some night vision gear, and somebody called the cops and thought we were doing something we shouldn't be doing, which was not the case. And the cop showed up, and we had multiple night vision devices on tripods so we could record and test them and whatnot. These two city PD showed up glowing like Christmas trees. They had multiple IR beacons on them. So you want to talk about being easily identified, as you know, because you've got NVGs and used them many times. Now your cops stand out like a sore thumb because they have an IR beacon. For those who don't know what that is, you know, guys like Mike would wear that in theater, in operations. And if God forbid something happened to them from the sky, Jeff Nicholas and guys like that, the 160 Night Stalkers, could see somebody like Mike, could see his IR beacon and knew where they had to rescue the guy.
Just
Khalid,
Chris, real quick, just to caveat that, the things that we're talking about with Afghanistan, we left behind fusion goggles. Fusion is the infrared spectrum blended with the ability to see heat and identify the outline of heat, which means it's not even about a IR game, an infrared game. Because that game, you have to have some type of loom to be able to enhance the sensor and the nods. Tied in with thermal capability, dude, a guy could be hiding behind a vehicle and you could see the imprint or the outline of his heat signature, and he could think he's hiding and presenting a very present target with that imagery that we left behind in Afghanistan.
It's absolutely insane, and we've shown it many months ago, but I'm going to show it again. This is what Mike is discussing right here. And if memory serves me right, these units run our DOD somewhere around $45,000, $50,000 a piece that we left behind. So you can see there's infrared, but as he mentioned, you have a thermal outline around everybody. I mean, it looks like a video game. There's no hiding from this. Pretty crazy stuff. So sorry, Khalid, I didn't mean to sideline you for an extended period of time, but want to hear your thoughts on the bad guys posing as good guys and just that extra element of insanity being thrown into the mix.
Well, this is something that we have been talking about for now almost a year, because police uniforms have been stolen, military uniforms have been stolen, stickers have been stolen, badges have been stolen. I am now starting to get worried about dry cleaners where police officers take their uniforms to be cleaned, and the dry cleaner being hit and those uniforms specifically being stolen. Because once they start looking like you, that automatic mental trust level is there, and you'll go right up to them and they'll put a bullet in you. I mean, the idea that you have to work with is, when you're fleeing a situation where there's firing going on, you're going to be looking for someone you know in a uniform, or a team leader, or someone who is responsible for putting the people into a safe place. If that guy is a first responder, a fake first responder, and he's able to dupe you with the uniform, because when you're in that stress position, you're not thinking shoes, you're not thinking belt, you're not thinking badge, you're not thinking these things. So you're not mentally focused on, does he look like a cop or not? Does he look like a sheriff's officer or not? And you're going to go with him, and all he's going to do is lead you to a point where he can blow you up. So the problem we've got is that, and we've said this before, is that the level of complacency that exists in the US right now, where everyone is stuck in their phones, no one's looking around, no one's recognized what a police officer looks like. What's the uniform look like nowadays? I mean, you may have seen a uniform on a TV show, but that may not be the uniform that is what's being worn right now. Get an idea of what a cop looks like, head to toe. So when you're in that stress position, in that stress mentality mode, you look and you pick certain things off. Okay, the belt matches, the shoe matches, the uniform matches. Yeah, that's a cop. I can trust him. But if you're in distress mode and you're not thinking, you're dead.
Yeah, it's scary stuff. So I want to back up just for a second. Then we've got half a dozen segments to go through for the balance of the podcast. But Sarah, describe this graphic that your team put together. It is like, what a graphic. Obviously, it's a serious eye test for anybody to try and see. But I want to pull it up on screen so people can see precisely how complex the army, this, jihadi army is. This is a unbelievable diagram, by the way, Sarah.
Yeah, so it's really progressed a lot from this graphic too. So right now they're kind of basically calling it the Islamic Resistance Council, but the just the short term is the Islamic Army. But what a lot of people don't know is just who all has joined this, okay? So when we just talk about what we all know from kind of Afghanistan and Pakistan, obviously the Afghan Taliban's in it, Al-Qaeda. And when we talk about Al-Qaeda, we're talking about Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, Ansar Sharia, and JNIM, okay? Then all of Al-Qaeda's branches. Then TTP is in it. Then if you move over into Pakistan, Lashkar-e-Taiba joined it, Jaish-e-Mohammed joined it, Al-Badr joined it. You go to Central Asia, Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan joined it, the Tajikistan Taliban joined it. You go to Syria, HTS joined it, Haris al-Din joined it. If you go to the Levant, Hamas joined it, the Islamic Resistance joined it, and Hezbollah joined it. And then when you go global, Islamic State joined it. These groups have all made agreements to come together under an Islamic army, and it's being completely ignored. Like I said, at least people are going to see them come together now with the Khalid piece, the piece that ISIS is doing on the U.S. soil, which is kind of like the attacks where you live, work, and play. The one good news is the mastermind of that piece of the attack, Abdullah Maki, was killed in March. But as most people know, the train had already left the station, right? The attackers deployed, they're now in the operational stage. So we haven't seen that thwart it, but at least hopefully it did give a little confusion, maybe put in some delays, which we're always hoping for. But yes, the Islamic Army is very, very dangerous. They help lead the fall of Syria. They're helping to do the push to lead to the fall of Mogadishu. They're going to be doing the same in Burkina Faso, in Iraq, and they've deployed a very large number of them here to the United States and to Europe.
So, Sarah, Khalid had mentioned several months ago that typically when the bad guys' plans are released to the public, it sets them back time-wise for their attack to come up with a new way that's potentially unknown. But it seems to me what's happening now is they don't even give a crap. Like, they're just completely emboldened to carry on with what they have planned. Maybe you could speak to that briefly.
Yeah, well, actually, really why they're so confident is when the new administration, they're already confident in the last administration. When the new administration came in, it was either like the last week of January or the first week of February, they sent some sort of delegation to meet with Sirajuddin Haqqani. And it was after that meeting that Sirajuddin Haqqani went back to Al-Qaeda. And as we know, he got removed from the bounty list with his with his brother Abdulaziz, who's also involved in this plot. And Siraj briefed Al-Qaeda saying, the CIA is not going to thwart this plot. The U.S. administration is not going to get involved. They don't care. It's a full go. So we had an opportunity at the beginning of this administration to walk in there and say, we know there's a plot. We're carpet bombing Afghanistan tomorrow if you don't start pulling operatives back. Instead, they went in there weak. They kept paying the Taliban, and now all the enemy thinks they can run all through us. And then Witkoff, their opinion of Witkoff is they can roll all over him too, as you can imagine. So we showed weakness to the enemy, and they said full speed ahead. So unfortunately, the one chance we had to thwart it, I think, is well past now. I think even if we started bombing Afghanistan tomorrow, we waited too long. It should have occurred the end of January, beginning of February, unfortunately.
Thanks, Sarah. I want to quickly mention that graphic that Sarah's team produced. If you go to survivaldispatch.news, sign up for a free account, click on the situation report, which is the article at the top of our page right now. There's all kinds of stuff that we put in that SITREP today that you can download, including that graphic and multiple other PDFs and whatnot. So, Mike, I want to come to you here and kind of move into why people's mindset matters more than their gear, which is typical, MO for you guys that are operators. But why do civilians in general, overinvest in gear, but underinvest in mindset, training, stress inoculation, all those sorts of things.
So I wrote a book about this, and part of what I identified is a lot of it has to do with arrogance and ego. I mean, I will say that most of it is our responsibility, just like we're doing right now, to educate the public on what they don't know. You don't know what you don't know, right? And that's part of the problem. And if you live in a beautiful part of the country and nothing ever happens, then you think everything's fine. I used to tell my mom this all the time, because my mom had a beauty salon really off of Bragg Boulevard in Fayetteville, North Carolina. We call it Vietnam, which is a really bad place in the country. And if you've ever been down Bragg Boulevard, you were probably in a vehicle with your doors locked, maybe even with a gun in your lap. I mean, it was like rolling down Route Irish early on in the GWAD. And so I would always tell her, because she said, it's fine here, it's safe here. It's because she went from her house to work, to the restaurant, back to the house, and then did that and repeat. That was her pattern of life. Well, you never pay attention to this stuff until you become a victim. And if you're lucky enough to have survived, then you take that and you go, oh, I made a mistake potentially. And you identify the errors, and then you fill that void with capability, right? With education, with training, and then you're more capable. What we're saying, which is the whole point of this, preemptively, that if you're understanding of what's going on in the world around you, then you'll be less complacent because you'll be proactive. And so those are the steps that I hope people move forward with. Look, I could criticize a lot of arrogance and ego, because I've met a lot of people who have that, and they don't want to pay attention to it. And I get that human instinct or that behavior. But the reality is, if you're not paying attention to what we're saying, if you're not taking steps in proactive preparation, you are likely just going to be a victim. There were 2 victims today, 2 innocent children who were praying when they were killed, when bullets flew through the glass windows that were near them. I mean, this is happening domestically more often, associated with mental health issues and extremism. But what happens when these subtleties that we pay attention to for a 12-hour news cycle makes American history? And that's why we want to take it serious. And lastly, if you're prepared for the worst case scenario, you're kind of covering down on everything in between. So I don't prepare for the best case scenario. I prepare for the worst. What we're saying is the preparation for the worst. By the benefit of what we're speaking about, you're going to be prepared for everything else in between.
I appreciate that, Mike. And just because you brought up your mother, and clearly no disrespect intended, but for those of you not aware, Mike has been moonlighting. He has a cooking show now, and he impersonates his mother's accent when he's cooking. And it's,
don't watch that video. Mom.
It's it. Go. Everybody else in the audience, go watch that video. It's pretty funny. It's good stuff. I would throw in one thing, that in 1950 we peaked at somewhere around 550,000 inpatient beds in psychiatric institutions across the country. That number today is less than 40,000. So we have, and the population is double what it was then. So we have a whole bunch of mentally ill people running around popping SSRIs, and we have no means to treat them. And the treatment protocol is basically supposed to be that if somebody, let's say they're bipolar and they go into some crazy state, or schizophrenic, you take them to the ER, and the ER is supposed to have resources to deal with them, and they don't. They're not professionals in that area. They're professionals in, trauma sort of stuff. So I've been saying for a while, make asylums great again, not just make America great again. So Sarah, I want to come to you next, and I'm curious what your thoughts are. How do networks disguise their rehearsal? As we're speaking about these attacks and they're rehearsing, and I'm coming to you for the same question, Khalid. How do they disguise? How does nobody see them doing what they're doing?
Yeah, so the rehearsals actually occurred in Afghanistan and Syria. They're not doing the rehearsals here. What they're doing here is like the pre-attack surveillance and those type of things, making IEDs, etc. So they're not practicing as a team and ambushing a building out in the country. Okay, so that's a little different. And they decided to not do any of that here, as you can imagine, because so many indicators popped before 9/11, and people said this is strange. These guys are in this group doing this thing or this training. So that's why that's changed. So we're not going to see that piece this time in the plot. I mean, Colin might have a different opinion, but that's my opinion.
Khalid, your thoughts on that?
Well, we know that the surveillance is going on. We know recon is going on. We have heard that in the Arizona desert and up in Idaho and North Dakota, they've run some training drills. But we don't have any pictures or videos to back it up and say, yeah, that's happened. But the problem we've got right now is that you have a situation that's developed. You have people moving around, taking videos, taking pictures, doing full active recon, and no one is paying any attention to them at all. And when you're not paying attention, you're going to lose. Because part of that it's like Mike was saying, was when you're not mentally ready, the gear's not going to save you. You can go and buy 10 guns, but if you haven't gotten yourself ready to go into that firing range and fire, and not just fire, but mentally understand you're going to take someone's life, you're not going to be ready for what happens here. You can have the greatest weapons in the world, the most expensive weapons in the world, but if you aren't mentally ready that I've got to pull this gun and fire and take someone's life, you are not shooting to injure. This is not a break-in at your home where you are shooting somebody in the leg to get him down on the ground and wait for the police to come. This is taking a life. And when I bought my first gun, I was really, I was an absolute arrogant, because I thought, I've got this gun. I'm a badass and I can do whatever I want. First time one of my friends walked up and said, so have you been to the range? And I mean, what's a range? And that's when it clicked with me that it's not the gear, it's the mentality. When that mentality clicks in and you start to understand what you're dealing with, and then preparing for what you're dealing with, then you can only win. And that's the whole idea behind the red cell. Understand what's coming, think like what they're doing, and figure out how you can beat them.
Oversimplification, and I'm paraphrasing Sun Tzu, but essentially human beings never rise to the occasion. They fall to their level of training. So if you train at such a high level of stress that when the thing happens, it's not that high, then you can function through it. Also want to give a shout out to my good friend, Tony Blauer, who, and obviously I'm biased, but this is the preeminent expert on sudden violence in the entire world. He coined a phrase in the 1990s called weaponize the flinch. And what he just described is what Khalid was alluding to, how fast you can change gears. So you're attacked, you realize you've been attacked. Your autonomic system has kicked in. So if something comes flying at you, nobody thinks, oh, maybe I should put my hands up to block that. You autonomically do it. But how do you take that and then go on the offense from there to take control of the situation? Mike's an expert in that field as well. But a funny thing about Tony is, I got a text from him last night saying, hey, check this out. One of my students sent me a screenshot from ChatGPT. It was asking, who the best self-defense instructor is in the world. And ChatGPT said it was Tony Blauer. I had actually seen that before. I said, I thought you already knew. He didn't. So that's pretty cool. He sent it out to his email list today. He's an amazing, amazing guy. So Mike, just because you've got more hands-on experience than anybody else that I know in this stuff, can you give us an account of when mindset, saved you or, resulted in the mission coming out the way it was supposed to, as opposed to all of the other stuff?
Yeah, it's an easy one. The first gunfight that I was in Afghanistan wasn't a gunfight. It was a rocket attack. And I wasn't expecting, you train as a Green Beret, as a Ranger for all these patrol tactics that come out of the Vietnam era. Walking on patrol, make contact with the enemy, react to contact, and then go through your battle drill process. It's very doctrinal. And when you think about that preparation, it involves an M4, maybe with a blank adapter, a little bit of, like you said, it's activating the fight or flight. And you get that adrenaline, that norepinephrine, that cortisol, and then you manage it. You work through it. Nobody prepares you for being on the receiving end of a 107 millimeter rocket. that has a kill radius of 25 plus meters. If you're on the receiving end, if you're downwind of it, it could be 100 meters, and it eviscerates people off the planet. And so I'm out in the open on a helicopter landing zone, ironically, just picking up bottles of water that a C-130 had dropped a pallet, and it destroyed it because they were always scared to fly in the valley, so they dropped it really high, and it rained down water bottles. Well, the enemy knew this, and they set up a rudimentary setup, which a 107 self-stabilizes because, you know, forward and aft, it has the ability to self-stabilize. Well, again, I locked up. I'm like, I'm a Green Beret. I trained for this, except when that 107 impacted the earth, I cowered. Now, because of my training, that took me a few seconds to process, where otherwise it would have been paralysis. It would have been a hypoarousal or a hyperarousal even, where it locks you up and it makes you freeze. I worked through the process. I mentally checked myself back in, and then I got on task. I had an emergency procedure. I had a step-by-step process going, okay, now get in the ATV, drive across, get the wire, grab it, pull it, let the guys go through the breach, get to the 50 cal, ready for the direct attack. Again, training, like you said, we typically fall back to the training. But in addition, part of it is working through the mental stress of managing it in yourself. You don't have to be an operator to be good at this. You just have to be willing to inoculate and expose yourself to new challenges. You don't like ballet because your wife's into it, go to ballet. Well, what do you mean ballet? It's like, well, you're uncomfortable with that. There's a visceral reaction. You're like, I don't need to be here. And when you manage that, because you breathe, you change your mindset and you walk away from it, you're like, oh, that wasn't so bad. Or maybe it was the worst thing ever. But maybe it wasn't so bad. The overall point is you just need to confirm and validate what you think is in your head. You got tats, you got a beard, you're jacked. That doesn't mean you're vetted and validated. I've seen plenty of guys who were trained and vetted and validated in their mind. When it came to their first gunfight, they cowered. They made a mistake. We all do it. So definitely get the training and definitely take it serious.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I appreciate that very much. So just want to mention this again. There's all kinds of articles like this one, key tips for prepper mental preparedness, on our Substack, which is survivaldispatch.news. When you go there right now, you're going to see the live video. It goes away when it's done. But this is today's SITREP right there, SITREP red cell. And when you click on that and you scroll down to the bottom where my signature is, you'll find all kinds of downloads and all kinds of additional links and resources here to stuff that's directly related to the topics we're covering here tonight. So, Sarah, I was hoping that you could help maybe explain the red cell mindset in generic terms, and then how that may apply to private families.
Sure. Well, really, there's kind of like red cell, red team. So when we say red team, lots of times in the analytic world, it's like if you have a different point of view, it's giving a grouping of people time to work through that point of view. And then you can argue the two. I think one of the greatest examples that a lot of people would understand is from Zero Dark 30, right? So the CIA's assessment was Osama bin Laden was in Shitral, Pakistan, where Sana Ullah Ghaffari is, by the way, the Abbey Gate mastermind. But of course he wasn't. He was in Abbottabad, and Maya knew that. And Maya had to prove it. She had to fight for it. And so that you have to be one of those kind of people, right? To put your neck on the line and say, no, you have the assessment wrong. This is the truth, right? So that's kind of red teaming. And like I said, to push your thought through, you really got to be one of those kind of people. Red cell is a little thing we're doing kind of now with law enforcement. And we saw this kind of be a problem in Israel. And that's why. So basically, the terrorists in advance did some sort of pre-attack surveillance of law enforcement and paid attention to how they responded. And so in the second wave of attacks, as law enforcement in Israel started responding, they were set up on the roads they knew they had to come down and ambush them, right? So we've been telling law enforcement, red selling is more, look at my vulnerabilities, right? Look at where I have gaps in my security that someone could take advantage of, and fill them, even just digital readiness, right? If they're going to go after our first responders, what do you have online that they can use to target you? Because they're using a lot of online resources ahead of time to do pre-attack surveillance. Not everything's just on the ground. So just keep some of those things in mind. So it's kind of two sides of the coin.
That amazing answer. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'll just quickly show, this is another link that you can get in today's SITREP, how red cells shed light on blind spots in the strategic planning process. And I'm not going to read through it. I just want to point out that it's there. So Khalid, very specific question for you, because theoretically, you've spent some time on the other side of the border without naming the border in particular. But how do these terror networks run their own red cell rehearsals?
Well, we caught one of them, and we sat down, we ran through an interrogation process with them and figured out how they do their red cells. Then in Command 11, we built a red cell team that thinks just like the terrorists, literally separated them from the organization and put them completely into terrorist propaganda, looking at what they do, reading what they read, thinking the way they think, and they would help advise us whenever we were looking on going across the border. The advantage that gives us is understanding from their point of view, from their teaching, from their knowledge. Because, we've got 4 or 5 books that we have that are the foundation of the jihadi principle, from the beginning to where Al-Qaeda came, to where ISIS came, to where they are now, to Lone Wolf. 5 books that we use to teach from. Those 5 books literally explain to you where that mentality comes from. And that team is responsible for not understanding those books, but watching the videos, reading the papers that come out, looking at everything comes out on all the dark web channels. So they are literally inside our organization, the terror group. And they advise us when we're going across the border. Because getting inside their red cells is very difficult. We were lucky we caught one of their guys. When we captured him, we put him into interrogation and we got all the information out of him. Once we understood how they were operating, they are looking at not only how we behave, they are looking at what we're watching, they are looking at how we buy, they're looking at how we move, they are looking at who we trust, they're looking at how we pray. They have got a full psychological profile on whoever their target is, whether it be Pakistan, whether it be Europe, whether it be the US. They have broken you down to a bare bones level that this is where their weaknesses are. This is where we can hit them. This is how we can hit them. And the only reason we understand it is because we went to that level. That made it easier for us to train the Pakistani counterterrorism teams in the police departments, to work with the army, to work with the special operators inside of Pakistan that are part of our military, to help them understand what they were dealing with both on our side of the border and on the other side of the border as well.
Yeah, thanks, Clede. Mike, I want to stick with the training aspect here. So Philip DePino, who owns WAFT, where our families train in the middle of nowhere here in Florida, when he puts people through training for things like gas station encounters, those sort of things, he says to everybody participating, this is just an ink blot. It'll never happen again exactly the same. I'm not counseling you to memorize this martial arts move or that martial arts move, but training that autonomic system. And I'm curious how at an operator's level like yourself, how do you train special forces guys and operators to have that autonomic response? Here's the best analogy I can draw. A football player who's seen a play 1,000 times before, say a linebacker, doesn't have to stop and think. And if he did have to stop and think, he's half a step behind. He's not fast enough to get to the play. He's not in the play. That type of second nature, is that inherent in people and you can optimize it, or is it something you can instill in people?
I believe it could be trained, but I would say that a lot of it has to do with your ability to process information and also critically think. A lot of problems are reactive and require quick solutions, but there are also problems that need to be thought through, processed rapidly, and that's a meaning or attributed to your ability to adapt, and that comes with time, and that comes with experience, and it comes with training. all of them are inclusive of each other. You have to do them all at the same time. One of the things that comes to mind is like CQB, close quarters battle, is a very complex art form, essentially. I mean, free flow CQB and maneuvering through a house, people think it's an isolated skill set. You walk into a room, you look for bad guys, and you shoot the bad guy and save the good guy. But it's so much more complex than that, because you have to do everything at the same time while under the pressure of stress. I mean, when I tell people, like, you know, you land a little bird on top of a roof, you fast rope 60 foot from an MH60 on top of a roof, and you enter a cupola into a house where you know there are potential people trying to clack themselves off. Well, how would you go through that process? Well, if you're not conditioned for the stress, then you're going to fail. You're going to kill the good guy and potentially get killed by the bad guy. So you have to do it. And one of the misnomers here, because it's pretty complicated, but one of the misnomers here is that special forces or special operations operators are adrenaline junkies. I would counter that. It's my own opinion. The opinions vary. I would counter that with that's not even close. I mean, when I was a free fall jump master jumping with my team, and I creeped out to the edge of a ramp at 20,000 feet with O2, a ruck between my legs, and a sniper rifle attached to my body, I didn't have adrenaline. I mean, I had adrenaline that was regulated. I had cortisol that was regulated. But if I was overwhelmed and hitting the red line or beyond the red line, I would certainly make mistakes. So we had to be conditioned with it. I know you guys have likely seen this, but Rob O'Neill talks about it. It's presented in the movie. When they flew into Abbottabad to get Osama bin Laden, the guys were sleeping. Every single operation I've been on, we would sleep until the 5-minute out call. And collectively, we'd be like, why is everybody so sleepy? It's because we're basically suppressing the adrenaline and that performance stress that we need on target. And we're getting into a mode, a mindset, and we're relaxed. You'll get a 5-minute call. People start elbowing each other. And at the 1-minute call, I'm checking everything. My hands are touching the pressure pad on my laser on my gun. I'm focusing in my nods to something that's relevant to a close distance or a far distance, depending on the target set. I'm activating potentially the infrared laser off the floor of the MH60. I'm touching the tether attached to the floor of the helicopter. So there are protocols and processes that take experience. I've seen new operators that are not very good. And then I've seen seasoned operators that are like Gandalf. I mean, they've been through the gambit. So again, it requires a whole bunch of training and experience in conjunction with each other to become a very sound operator. And with that point, imagine a 25-year-old police officer out of the patrol academy who arrives to a suicide bomber in a active shooting scenario that's kicking off. And if he turns around, he has no reference for the capability because he hasn't learned that skill set, and he just makes it up as he goes, it's probably not going to be the best course of action.
Thanks, Mike. That was a great explanation. Actually, something relative to this. So our mutual friend, Mike Sterling, and I, and my wife, we were shooting some TV footage shows in Pahrump, Nevada. So Prairie Fire, which used to be Front Sight. And we had a day off in the filming schedule. So we went into Vegas and we went to the crime museum. And in the crime museum, they have this FBI shooting thing that you can go through, right? And you're a 3-person team. And I can't remember what the simulation tools are, but they were pretty slick. And the deal is that it's a hostage situation. You go in, you kill the bad guy, you rescue the hostage. Well, the first room we went into is the living room. And the hostage popped up from behind the sofa, and I shot them DRT, and we failed, and we were kicked out right away. So, and Mike Sterling was pissed off. He said, "You failed us like instantly." I'm like, well, he moved. He shouldn't have moved. But anyway, it's funny when you mentioned Rob O'Neill. We've had him on a couple times. He said to me, Mike, that the 45 minutes ride when they left the compound was the most stressful, worst 45 minutes of his life to get across the border and get out of Pakistan. He said going in, there was no stress at all, but getting out, there was a lot of stress after the fact. So to you again, Sarah here, and I don't know if there's a an answer for this or not, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts. How do you balance and combine hard intel with creative, like what if scenarios and thinking is concerned? Then you go into a role that you've done for years now and advise people and say, okay, these are the potential outcomes. These are the things that you should be doing. How do you balance between hard and what if?
Yeah, I mean, as we kind of heard from Khalid, like you take the intel, but then when you make the what ifs, you have to make the what ifs based on what you collected or what you've seen or what the terrorists are training on, because Americans can make the craziest what ifs all day long, but they're not thinking like the enemy. I think like a really good example is the enemy likes long-term impacts, right? So one example I like to give people is, let's say they're going to strike San Francisco. So Americans will be like, well, I'm going to hit the 49ers stadium and kill all those people in the stadium. Okay. Well, the terrorists are likely going to take down the Golden Gate Bridge. So to rebuild the stadium is like $2 billion there. Okay. You take down the bridge. It's at least $10 billion to rebuild it. You put the fear of bridges in people. This is a long-term impact. It affects the economy more than, of course, like a football stadium would. And so the terrorists want something that rolls year after year and puts a different economic impact and fear. So if you don't understand how the enemy's thinking, you're going to keep preparing for something you would do or you would assume, and then you're really just not putting the time in. We don't have much time, right? So I want you to spend the time, where it counts, right? So what we do is we say, here's what we've seen them do drills on. So we've seen them do drills on schools, right? Churches, supermarkets. They want to hit federal buildings like FBI, right? So if you have a hostage situation at the FBI, you're probably not getting those 4 FBI teams to deploy to your mid-tier cities. They're going to care about themselves. They can't even keep their own buildings safe in this situation, right? So we have to look at things that way. We also have to think through, there's a couple different things they're focused on this attack. One is bringing former attacks to fruition. That's why we're seeing Bojinka. Well, what other attacks failed that we need to be studying or that they might honor for this attack? Another thing is they want to impact people who served overseas, but they're mostly focused on people who detained terrorists and, in their opinion, innocent Muslims who weren't terrorists, right? FBI did a lot of entrapment operations. So when they're recruiting these guys for the attacks, they're saying, hey, look, we're all alive. We're all free. The FBI detained all these poor guys. They weren't members of Al-Qaeda. They weren't members of ISIS. You need to now go in their honor and do this attack, right? So we have to think through then, what are they looking at? So obviously they're looking at buildings where people work who were involved in detainee debriefing programs. We're looking at communities that veterans retired in, right? Tampa's a really great example. The New Orleans attacker cased New Orleans, but he cased Tampa, right? Why would you case Tampa? It's a huge retirement area from SOCOM, CENTCOM, et cetera. A lot of law enforcement moved down here. So just those are some of the things you should have in mind when you're kind of thinking through how they're going to do this.
Yeah, as you were mentioning that, I was thinking it's not that many months ago that there was an alarm raised. Actually, Randy Nance, who was a Green Beret as well, in the middle of a live broadcast like this, said, hey, I just got a warning that GWAT vets in Tampa are being targeted. And it was before it had gone public. It came through in one of his apps. So that's interesting that you would raise that. Khalid, last question for you before we move on to the next segment, which is wargaming for civilians. How can a red cell thinking, if I'm using the term in the right context, expose vulnerabilities in people's daily routines, like people are trying not to be on the X?
Well, look, again, they've got a psychological profile on you. They know how you operate through the day, from what time you get up, how you move, which route you take to the office, what building you go to, where you stop for coffee. And they're determining targets based on that, like Sarah was saying. When you start looking at that mentality, that forget the high value target, forget the White House, forget the Capitol building, forget the high value targets. Start thinking where the psychological impact is the greatest. Then you start to understand how this is going to run. Because for the terrorists, hitting a huge building, it creates a great video. but it doesn't leave a lasting effect on the American people. And this operation is a lasting effect. They want to put you 20 years backwards. This is payback. This is what we've heard in every camp. This is payback. What you did to us in Afghanistan, what you did to us in Iraq, this is payback on the US and on Europe. That's why they're targeting Afghanis who have operated as interpreters, who were part of the US. They're also targeting people that were part of Spec Ops. This is revenge. The intent is to hit you the way you hit them. Children, churches, shopping malls, buildings, commercial areas, leave an economic effect and a psychological impact that it takes you years to recover from. That's the whole intent behind this attack. So when you start looking at the red sun mentality, if you're thinking, like Sarah was saying, if you say, okay, I'm going to hit the 49ers stadium, there's no psychological impact there unless the stadium is full. Then you have taken 20, 30,000 people out in one shot. But that gets rebuilt. People forget about it. How long did it take for us to forget about 9/11?
Not long, unfortunately.
And what effect did 9/11 have on middle America? That's why they've picked the cities they've picked, because that's middle America. It's the secure part of the US, the places that no one would ever think of a terror attack ever happening. When you hit those cities, the psychological impact is massive. The economic impact is massive. The ripple effect that goes across the US will shut the entire US down. We've talked about this in previous episodes where 3 days of food on the grocery store shelves, then nothing. The effect of that, banks being shut down, power grids being shut down, internet being shut down, telephone systems being shut down. That's a massive effect.
Yeah, we're never more than 3 missed meals away from anarchy. I mean, look at what people do for TV on Black Friday, let alone food.
I want to add one thing. There's this movie, Body of Lies. Russell Crowe in the beginning, where he's doing his monologue. At the very end, he says, they've realized how easy it is to take us down. He wasn't joking.
That movie's almost 20 years old. It's like 2007-8 time frame. Right? I just want to quickly mention a lot of this revolves around situational awareness. So again, go to our Substack, survivaldispatch.news, click on today's SITREP. It's free. Go to the bottom. There's links. My senior editor, Grace, and we wrote this article earlier this year in January, and she did most of the work. I gave her some bullets, and she's an amazing writer. So you can see how long it is. There's a fair bit to it. I consider it a pretty decent resource on the topic of situational awareness, which is key to everything we're discussing here. So we're going to pivot now into, call it Wargaming for Citizens. Mike, I'm going to hit you with 3 questions, whatever order you want or not. But number 1, I'd like to know what the first 10 seconds decision cycle looks like for you when you hear shots ring out. 2, as a father, how do you prep mentally for being separated from your young children? And 3, when you aren't separated, how do you move your family safely through choke points if you happen to be caught in one of these cities that's attacked?
Okay, so the first one is we typically call it, it's doctrinally called react to contact, but it's a very effective technique in moving to cover while simultaneously gathering all the situational awareness you can in your environment. So at the same time you move, you need to be heads up. And that means you need to be cognitive. A technique to stay cognitive, because again, the autonomic fight or flight system, this shift from parasympathetic wants to make you, the fight or flight mechanism is a mobility tactic for the human body. That's what it's built for. It's made for movement. So utilize and harness that capability, but you got to stay heads up, because typically the brain at that point, the critical thinking process is a liability versus the instinct of the human body surviving and moving away or fighting. And so as you're moving, stay heads up, breathe, self-talk, Those things have nothing to do with oxygen intake. Despite the carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide coming out of you, it is going to enhance the oxygen in you. It's the fact you're thinking about breathing, which keeps you cognitive. It keeps you in your head, because the worst thing that could happen is you basically, the analogy is you drain out of your head, you're in your body, and then when you get behind cover, you don't know what to do next. Versus you're moving to cover, you're seeing what's going on, you're taking in information, and that gives you the cue for the next step. What was the second question? TBI.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That's fine. Second question was, you know, as a father, you've got young kids. How do you prep mentally for being separated from your children? And then when you are together, how would you move a family through a choke point, for example, if somebody finds themselves on the X in one of these attacks?
So you could never prepare mentally. You could do anything you want. It's not going to change the fact that your children and you are separated. What you need to focus on is the bigger picture. The bigger picture might be you might be displaced, your kids might be safe, and you need to fight to get home. Inversely, your kids are out and about, you're at home, and then the school was just attacked. So how do you manage with that technically? I get asked that question a lot, like, hey, Mike, what would you do if your kids were in a school that were overtaken by bad guys, in this case, terrorists? Because I have the skill set, I think everybody knows exactly what I'm going to do. But it's not going to be reckless. It's not going to be bravado. It's going to be very specific based on my background. If you don't have that background, you might even take that lead. So I don't think there is any amount of preparation that you could do. What you need to focus on is task to task, how you're going to reconvene, reunify with your family at a later time. Focus on the priority, which always number one is security. And then the third question, again, I have TBI.
Yeah, just getting through a choke point with moving by yourself, even with your wife, is not the same as moving with young children. So getting through navigating those choke points.
I arrogantly say that you have two categories of people in your life. They're either liabilities or assets. Everybody here is an asset to me. Don't worry, you're not liabilities. You're assets. Your children happen to be in this context liabilities because they can't function, right? There's a reason we condition our children under these stressful circumstances by giving them clear guidance. When I was a squad leader in the infantry, if I told you to assault the bunker and you turned around and said, well, why do you want me to assault the bunker, Sergeant? I would say, well, we have a problem. And we would probably talk about it later after the operation, or maybe not at all, because I would have fired you. So I need immediate action, which means if your children are part of the equation and you haven't conditioned them for this type of event, you haven't told them, my favorite is the self-defense analogy. Everybody in self-defense thinks their EDC in their waistband is the self-defense gun on their nightstand. The problem with that is you have children involved. You might have it in self-defense in your waistband. You fire a gun in proximity of a child who's never experienced that, you'll put them immediately in fight or flight and they'll lock up, they'll seize, they'll freeze. And then you have now a dead weight liability that you have to put on your shoulder and carry out of harm's way. The best way is to train your family with expectations, condition them for stress. GRS, the case officers in Yemen hated me because when I came in there, I made them wake up early in the morning, sometimes 2 o'clock in the morning, and we rehearsed these drills. But then when they were inoculated to it, they're like, okay, I know exactly what to do. They could do it blindfolded. And so that's what you need to do. There's extremes to that. I don't want you to be grabbing your child on a flat range with a live gun, but I want them to have expectations of what to expect. Even if it's listen to daddy, do exactly what daddy says.
Great answer, Mike. I appreciate that. I wanted to mention, Khalid was speaking. Both of our feeds to Facebook got nuked. So good job, Khalid. So you pissed off somebody on that, and then I got to take a serious.
ISI hates Khalid.
Hates me.
Yeah, and I have to take serious issue with this person in the comment section. You shouldn't need a firearm. Be responsible for protecting your own life, liberty, and pursuit of freedom. Let the Polish National Guard do it for you. Best case scenario, 8-minute response time for one cop. You will be dead if you don't defend yourself. That is a foolish, liberal, anti-gun bullshit statement. Pardon my French, but if you believe that, you'll be amongst one of the first people who gets taken out. That is an absolutely ridiculous comment. So now that I got that out of my system, I get several questions for you, Sarah. And number one is, are there any pre-attack indicators that people should be aware of that might stand out for a soft target, say like a mall, a school, office building, anything like that? And then specific to schools, I want to know if they're like a primary or a secondary target from the intelligence that you and Cleet have gathered.
Sure. I mean, what can stand out is what doesn't look normal in those cases, right? So if there's people in the mall and they're not actually going into stores and shopping, they're looking at the exits, they're kind of paying attention to security, right? They're not focusing on the things you want. I mean, we've had some surveillance at schools, and people go to these schools and they ask all these questions about the school, and then the administrators find out they don't have a kid, right? Super weird. We've had instances at churches, where Middle Eastern males would go in, ask a lot of questions about security, and then a lot of them ask the same questions, do live stream. Super weird, right? So when something isn't normal, that's when you notice, right? We all have a gut, like the hair stands up in the back of your neck, and that's when you're like, hey, this isn't a normal thing. I might need to report this, or at least I need to get out of the area, alert someone of what I've seen, right? So that's something that is really important. And what was your second question? I don't have TBI, but I'm just...
No, that's okay. With the intel that you've been gathering, call it 9/11 2.0, are schools a primary or secondary target?
Yeah. So in my opinion, they're a secondary target in this situation, just because some of the things I've seen about when they're looking to do it, I'm not entirely sure if the timeline stays the same, that schools would even be in session. So we just have to kind of keep in mind, it doesn't really matter if it's a primary, secondary for Al-Qaeda, because schools are always a primary target, because we have all these bad actors knowing a school's a soft target. It hurts the heart of the community. And so I don't like to prioritize them, because I think at the end of the day, a top priority in every community is keeping your school safe, because those are our children. That's our future. So again, I don't like to rack and stack, but in this case, I think it's more supermarkets, hospitals, churches with schools too. We have to keep that in mind. And then federal government buildings, DC, airlines, and then transportation. So bus stations, subways, etc.
So I'm curious, Sarah, what your thoughts are on Americans reframing their thinking as far as, there was some of this happened in 9/11 1.0. The first plane, hit the tower, the North Tower. And then when the second one hit, it really sunk in. But how do we condition people to that Mumbai or Paris 2015 style of attack, that one attack is nowhere near the end of what your intelligence is saying? How do we get that through people's heads to think, okay, the attack's over, phew, I'm still alive, but you can't let your guard down?
Yeah, I really do think this attack is going to be so big that naturally you're not going to think it's over. I mean, think about 9/11. So 9/11, I was in Florida, I was at college, and it happened very far away. And when I went to the library at my college and saw it, I went straight to my car and went home. That is the natural response. And I do think the majority of people who are paying attention are going to realize this is not normal. This is bigger than it should be. And so I do think we're going to be okay in that regard. The one thing I'm worried about is, as kind of you asked Mike about, when people start to get separated, right? So if you're in an airport, they do a ground stop, you're now 4 states away. You might not be home for 24 or 48 hours by the time you get a group of people together, or get a car, if you can even get a car. Like, have you made a plan with your family for when you're not there? That's the kind of stuff I'm worried about, because then people start to panic. 9/11's 911 is going to go down. The phone networks are going to go down. What are your primary communication plans? Because that's when people start panicking. Oh my gosh, I can't get a hold of my loved ones. You start overloading the system. You're not ready for this. I mean, we just had 2 hurricanes back to back last year in Florida. And I'm telling you, it was chaos here. There were people getting in fights at the gas station because the people aren't ready. They're not prepared. And so we have to think through all those stuff in advance, so you're not that person in that situation.
No, thanks, Sarah. Very well said. 2 questions specifically for you, Khalid. why do these guys target evacuees? You know, in that second wave, they target the people who are trying to get off the X to evac, exfil, whatever. And what scenario are Americans ignoring that could completely blindside them in this?
Okay. Why do they target evacuees? The people that are fleeing?
Yeah.
Easy target. You're going to end up in a choke point. Once you end up in a choke point, it's a shooting gallery.
Okay.
I mean, I don't like using it as an example, but if we look at what happened today, the roads were jammed, the radios were jammed, your police was all in one location. You had federal, state, city, everybody had come to one place. That's a choke point. Once you're in a choke point, it's fish in a barrel. And the easiest targeting is done there. It's like Sarah was saying, when you talk about shopping malls, when you talk about commercial areas, you have a congregation of people in one place. When you have that congregation, it's very easy to control the exits, set up on top, and start firing. And taking out those people is very easy. Once you're out on a road, you have nowhere to hide. At least in a building, you can find some place to hide. But when you're on the road, where are you going to hide? So evacuation times are prime time for the attacks to significantly increase the body count. Second question.
Yeah. So the second question is, let me back up here a little bit. What scenario are Americans ignoring that could blindside them in all of this?
To be really honest, the idea that it can't happen. I mean, how many times do you have to be told that this is happening? And Chris, you know this. We get contacted by law enforcement. We get contacted by all kinds of people from around the country asking for information. They're trying to get the word out to people, and they're literally being told by their departments, this can never happen. Why are you so worried about it? And these same guys are coming, hospital administrators, law enforcement are coming back to us and saying, how do I get them to listen? We're going, if we could figure that out, they'd be listening to us. Your job would be easier. But that mentality that exists, and this is what the terrorists have beautifully crafted, that it cannot happen in America again. And that's what they're counting on, is that America will sit back and go, no, 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 no. We don't need to prepare. We don't need to worry. We don't need to train. We don't need to get mentally ready for it, because this can never happen. On September 10th, 2001, did anyone think a plane could hit the World Trade Center?
Yeah, probably
It
not.
happened the next day.
Yeah. Appreciate that, Khalid, very much. So we're going to move on to the next segment here. I'm trying to get through them as quickly as I can. But mental resilience and stress inoculation. I'm sure you've done this before, Mike, but our friend Dave Kemp from Righteous Savages was the one who clued me into this. Let me just get this article pulled up here. So it's an interesting graphic, as you can see. So Naval Postgraduate School, where science meets the art of warfare, MPS students research impact of stress on learning performance. And check out where his foot is. His foot's in a bucket of ice. So Dave Kemp, who was SWAT team leader for years, does lots of SWAT team training, like train SWAT teams. He said to me, he said, in addition to what I normally do for my, you know what my routine is. I put 1,000 rounds downrange every week, and it's, sprint, lift weight, shoot, sprint, and do that nonstop, high intensity for 45 minutes. He said, that's all fine and dandy. That's great, but you're not doing anything as far as your fine motor skills are concerned. So he said, take a bucket of ice, put your hands in it for 60 seconds. Let me know how you shoot after that. It's crazy how you lose those abilities and you lose your fine motor abilities. So my question for you, Mike, is what are practical stress inoculation drills that families can do? So not somebody like me who likes to shoot guns necessarily, but just a family in general. How do they engage in stress inoculation?
The easiest way to stress inoculate a family is go camping. And it's really simple. It's exposure. Remember, like the vagus nerve that runs through your body is regulated, or at least analyzed through the vagal tone, which is a rate of respiration with your heart rate. And that's how you measure stress in a person, or their resilience to stress. When you get into an unknown environment, or a changing environment, or an uncomfortable environment, the first time you poop in the woods, I wrote an article called Go Crap on a Rock. And people were like, what? Like, if you've never done that, it's because it's uncomfortable. If you're used to wearing makeup every single day, if you're used to, I mean, I take like 3 showers a day. I cannot go to bed without taking a shower. I'm super hygienic. When I go to the field, it bothers me because I want to be clean. Well, a lot of people aren't used to the exposure to uncomfortable situations. And that's what stress is. You know, when people talk about like getting through a gunfight, being resilient, it all has to do with stress. The problem with us as a country, because we have it so good, is our baseline for stress is manipulated. So now if you're driving in traffic, you see somebody at the 10 and 2 over gripping the wheel, smashing their head on the steering wheel, road raging. Well, under normal circumstances, they would be good. But again, we don't have a baseline of our stress. So things tick us off. And so when you take your family, you tell your child, and you're going to help them through this process, pack a 72-hour bag. And they do everything that they're supposed to. And then you help them with the things they need help with. And you tell them they're living out of that bag for the next 48 hours for a camping trip. Then they learn the lessons in real time. And you want to make it enjoyable, obviously. But for example, if they don't have a sleeping bag in their bag and you have a Mylar space blanket, well, they're going to be slightly uncomfortable. But I promise you, they'll never forget bringing a sleeping bag as one of their priorities for being comfortable in the woodline. Again, it's about adaptability. It's about critical thinking. It's about exposure to stress. And for me, the easy solution is just going camping. When I went to Ranger School for the first time, it sucked. Living in the field, not sleeping, not eating. But that exposure prepared me for a whole entire career. I mean, being a tomb guard in front of 3,000 people during a changing of the guard, forget being a Green Beret and going through special operations training, going through combat, having a CNN camera, you know, zooming into the side of my face while a couple thousand people are watching me to make a mistake. I mean, that was very difficult as a 18-year-old private at the Tomb of the Unknown. So that's the best advice that I have.
Oh, that's an awesome answer. Thanks, Mike. So, Sarah, with regards to stress, obviously, you know, high-level thinker, involved in some very stressful stuff because the information that you pass on is potentially life or death for the people on the receiving end of that information. So I'm curious how you've personally managed stress in those types of high stakes endeavors, targeting, and were there any cognitive traps that you saw appear when you were under stress?
Sure. Yeah. When you're dealing with this situation, I think one of the things that is actually more stressful is failing. People are afraid to fail because in intelligence, you only have a small amount of information and you have to make assessments. You have to kind of put your neck out there and you got to take risks, right? So the easiest thing is just be comfortable failing, know you're going to fail multiple times, and just have your end goal and say, hey, this is a short-term thing. Oops. Let's keep going. Let's go down this path. You know, let's try something different. And so that's what CIA people are really good at. They like to, you know, recruit scrappy people, right? Because you're overseas, everything goes wrong. Nobody follows timelines like we do here, which drives me nuts. I'm almost like a German when it comes to time. And you have to, right, just go with the punches and say, okay, I'm going to have to make this work how it is. I'm going to have to work with who's here, right? Your talent is who you have there, etc. What was the second question?
I'm just curious, as you were going through that process, were there any cognitive traps, you know,
Sure.
where you railroad yourself in the wrong direction? Myopic, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I do is, of course, you can get brain fog, those type of things. You know, like lack of sleep. Obviously, I work on stuff, and you know, I might not sleep for 3 days when I get into some of this terrorist info that I want to get as much details and try to pass, even though I pass to people I don't think are doing anything with it. But another thing is just kind of that concept of fear, the false evidence appearing to be real. I feel a lot of people kind of overthink and worry too much about something that isn't real, that doesn't exist, that's not in front of them, right? You know, I have a lot of threats against my life from a number of terrorist groups, besides even just some stalkers, right? I mean, I can't focus on those at all times because it's not right what's in front of me, right? I have to do the things that make sense to protect myself, you know, focus on my personal security. So just those type of things. So it's a good way to kind of mitigate the stress because you're not focusing on every little thing. You can't get into every little detail of things.
That's a great answer. Do you know who Rob Sweetman is by chance? Former Navy SEAL.
I don't think so, but maybe.
So when he got out of the Navy, he got a doctorate in sleep, and he owns a company now called Sleep Genius. And the website is Sleep Genius. You just put a dot in front of the US, so it's a .us domain. And he would have a lot to say about you staying up for several days. 3 days, you can kind of get away with it. I can't remember what the number was. Mike, is it 5 or 5.5 days they keep SEALs up for? Did they do that to you, by the way, as a Green Beret as well?
Yeah, I mean, in Ranger School, you're sleep deprived for a couple months. I think it's 3.5 hours a day on average. In Buds, wow. it is 5 days, and it is brutal for those guys.
Rob said that all of his studies showed that when you're up for that period of time, the 5+ days, that there's permanent brain damage that happens as a result of that. I mean, it's pretty crazy stuff. And being a Navy SEAL, just interesting from his perspective. He said, everybody, once you get to 24 hours without sleep, you're operating at the level of somebody who's impaired, driving a vehicle impaired. And he said this bravado of, operators and whatnot going sleep deprived makes them, the toughest. He said it's actually counterintuitive. And he's got some really interesting stuff on that. But anyway, moving on. Khalid, I'm curious, how do the terrorists train their minds for this stuff? Because that's not something we see a whole lot of here, but you do over there.
They, from what we've seen from terror training, because the guys in the camps tell us what they go through, it is brutal. They lock you in a room where you don't see the light of day, and they control the time. So it could be the middle of the night, and they'll tell you it's lunchtime. They will mentally drive you in a way where you have no idea what's going on around you. At the same time, they will start throwing things at you. They will hit you with a bucket of cold water. They take away sleep. They put sleep deprived with mental tension at the same time to get you to a point where you can operate with little or no sleep at all. Like myself as an example, I get 2, maybe 3 hours of sleep every couple of days. And the reason for that is because, like Sarah said, when you're dealing with death threats, when you're dealing with a lot of work, you've got to deal with what's in front of you. I live amongst the terrorists. I mean, I walk out my door and I don't know which one's a terrorist and which one's a good guy. So for us, we're always worried. And it's what they've created inside of these terrorists when they train them is the first few months of the time you're in that camp, you are treated like an animal. I mean, you don't have human privileges at all. They will lock you up. They will feed you whatever they want to feed you. If they want to feed you, they control your time. They control whether you see the sunlight or not. They did this to us when we were captured as well. I spent time in Taliban custody. They did the same thing to us as well. What we understand is this is how they figure out who is the commander, who is the fighter, who is the suicide bomber. Because the guy that's weak turns into a suicide bomber. The guy that can handle the tension a little bit, they train him with weapons. The guy that can handle it completely becomes a commander. And that's how they build out on their own systems.
Can I add one more thing too that they're doing that's really important to understand? They're also drugging the terrorists. So in the suicide camps, you're basically taking ecstasy. And then in the camps that we're talking about, like you're training in firearms and stuff, you're on modified fentanyl. It has pain suppression. It's so you can do prolonged attacks, right? Obviously in Syria, they're using Captagen. So we have to keep this in mind too, because some of these terrorists then are now hooked on these drugs. They have to use these drugs during their operation, which actually does give us another kind of one of those pre-attack indicators, right? But it's just something to keep in mind that they're also mentally messing with them using drugs, which is very concerning.
Yeah, that's...
Chris, I just because I would feel bad if I didn't say it. Sarah's on to something significant, because also for military and police that are going to potentially do sustained operations. As a former sniper who's done, we call them rods or RONs, rest over day or rest overnight, and been up for days at a time and had a specific technical objective, they would give us uppers, and we were issued uppers. And if you didn't have those, F-16 pilots were given the same. If you didn't have those in that life cycle, 24 hours, can you imagine what's going to happen to the capability that's on the forefront, that's responsible for direct action and hostage rescue, very precision operations? And so something just to think outside the box, if you're one of these organizations and you're the PA or you're the medic, think about how you're going to get through that circumstance, how you're going to extend the lifeline, essentially, of these men and women's capability to counter this threat if it's a domestic attack. I just want to put that out there because I have never thought about it until you guys have mentioned it. And I'm like, yeah, I was on uppers. Not all the time, but if we do a sustained operations, and if we didn't have that, we would have been a liability, and we would have got people killed or potentially cost us our own lives.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere that the Germans were actually the first ones to develop Adderall for that purpose, is also to make people angrier. Apparently, Adderall makes people angry. I'm not familiar with it, but I was going to ask you a question, though, Mike. I know a couple guys who were GWAT veterans. I know one guy in particular, there were 5 of our guys together. They had an M249, and they were being charged by insurgents, whatever you want to call them. And a couple of them almost got within arm's range. They, put a ton of holes in these guys, and they just kept coming. They didn't shut down until they either bled out or they hit a major organ like a heart. I'm curious, what did they give those guys to do that? And I'm assuming that you've seen stuff similar when you were deployed. Yeah,
I mean, a lot of them are getting methamphetamine derivatives. It's all over the place. I mean, it's in Pakistan. You could walk into a pharmacy and get it. So it's all over the battlefield, and it gives them that courage, but also, like you said, makes them in a way immune to pain. And until you shut down the pump house, you're going to get that. I've experienced that personally with a guy inside the house in close proximity, where I'm like nearly looking at the gun going, how is this happening? So it is something that happens. And then obviously there's a massive drug trade in Tajikistan and all the stands leading into Afghanistan, and it's prevalent. And if you think about that transitioning to here, well, it's not hard for these guys to hit the street and get it off the black market and then utilize it as part of their operation. As a reminder, the North Hollywood shooters, both of them were hopped up on speed and PCP, which is one of the reasons why they were able to walk around calmly, engaging and injuring 17 police officers, and even at some points getting engaged and injured and fighting through that pain because they were hopped up on drugs.
Yeah, it's a crazy additional element to all of this. So, Sarah, I want to come back to you. We're in the home stretch here, as far as call it like the family red cell blueprint, for lack of a better term. How do you build vigilance into your family's routines without creating unnecessary fear and paranoia?
Well, I think first off, you just make it as this is an emergency plan, crisis. You could say it's for hurricane, doesn't really matter. You don't have to tell your kids you're preparing for a terrorist attack, for one thing. Another thing is when you have plans in place and for multiple scenarios, they know what to do. They're comfortable with what to do. If something's different from the plan, right? They trained in some way, you prepared them in some way, and they're going to notice something's different too, right? Which is really important. Kids don't miss a thing, right? Which is a good thing. They might notice something different in the environment before you do, right? So I think you just have to be confident and secure in your plan. And then, as I've said, you got to make a plan without you in it. This is a huge problem we always have. People make a family emergency plan, the dad's in charge, and then the emergency happens and the dad's at work, right? And then nobody knows what to do and they can't put the plan together because the key piece is gone. So you have to really keep that in mind. And then you have to think through things like this is a hurricane, right? You have to plan, what if we don't have phone service? What if we don't have power for a week? What if we can't get to the grocery store? If there's hostage situations in town, you're not going to leave your house. Would you have the food in the house now prepared for that, right? So you have to be, take this into account. And then the last part that's super important is you have to have stop the bleed. This isn't just for a terrorist attack. If you're a parent and you got to help your kid in, let's say, a traffic accident, this is a life-saving skill every parent should have. And I think that should be a priority right now, that everybody goes through it. And if you have teenagers, you take them through it too.
A great answer, Sarah. Thank you. Khalid, I've kind of got a two-pronged question for you. So there's strength in numbers. The bad thing happens. Having a mutual assistance group, a MAG, is obviously a good thing, but we're in the age now where neighbors don't even know each other's names, let alone talk to each other. So that part of our society's gone to hell in a handbasket. But if somebody lives in a neighborhood where there's, friendly people who communicate amongst themselves frequently, what are the risks of oversharing your plans with your neighbors? And how do you balance your security versus building alliances with these people, in your opinion? I'm just trying to think in terms of people who are in the, the residential neighborhoods and all this crap goes down. Because was it you or somebody else who said the door-to-door crap that happened on 10/7 is entirely possible here? Because
entirely possible here. Yeah.
We live in an upper middle class neighborhood. Homes go for sale here. They sell instantly because this town is locked by the ocean and surrounding counties, can't grow. We have 2 empty homes a stone's throw from here. And I had a local PD tell me that they suspected they were being used as by cartels, at one point in time, as stash houses. And then I read something else. It's like, well, could be cartels, could be in our weapons cache, like you mentioned.
Well, look, the oversharing is your biggest enemy. And in today's day and age, we don't talk to each other anyway. The concept of conversation has disappeared. It's 140 characters, the text message, the voice message, and that's the extent of what we share. So once we start to talk to people, as part of a vetting process, for example, that who do I want as part of my support team if something goes wrong, you end up talking too much. And when you talk too much, you give up too much information. The goal here is to listen more. Ask leading questions, pull information out of people, assess your situation, and then respond based on what someone else is telling you. Someone tells you, like, I was looking at a prepper list, and they said, don't go into the supermarket and buy a month's worth of groceries. Buy 3 days, go back 2 days later, buy 3 days more. Go back 2 days later, buy 3 days more. So that no one figures out that you're building up a stockpile. That's an excellent idea. The number of people that I know, my parents included, that go in and buy 1 month of food, so that they don't have to go grocery shopping for a month. That's going to raise alarm bells. People are going to look and go, okay, if something happens, they're going to have food. So number one, control how you buy. When you're vetting, you're also looking at that. People who come back with crates of stuff from Sam's Club, Costco, that you would think would last them months, that's someone you need to put a little red mark next to, that this is someone who's got a stockpile. That doesn't mean that you use them for their stockpile, but you understand that if, God forbid, something kicks off, they've got the same mentality that you've got, that you've stocked up.
Yeah, I appreciate. Sorry. Go ahead, Khalid.
The other thing is you've got to be really careful in how you deal with people. There's a level of bias that's developed inside of every American, whether you be Democrat or Republican, whether it be pro to Second Amendment, anti-Second Amendment. There's a level of bias that's developed inside of people. You've got to eliminate that bias. When the world is collapsing, it's just you and your neighbors, and you've got to work together.
That's good advice. I'll give you a funny one here without mentioning the person's name, because some people in our audience know this individual, but he has a kit put together so that if something like this goes down, within about 20 minutes, he can make his home look like it's been burned out and abandoned. And then he just hide behind. People look at it, go, oh, there's nothing there. I'll just go on to the next place and see what I can get there. So, Mike, this is the final segment here. What's the most overlooked element of family planning?
I mean, the plan is the most overlooked element. I think people complicate this. You don't need a 5-paragraph operations order to formulate a plan. It starts with a conversation. In that conversation, you're technically doing wargaming or courses of action development. In that conversation, with the gaps that you're missing, you fill those gaps. Most of the time that you're having that conversation, my favorite one is that you say, honey, what would you do if somebody came in here and kicked in the door? And you're like, well, look at me, you know, like, of course I'm going to handle it. It's like, well, what if they're armed? And you're like, well, I'm armed. It's like, well, where's your firearm? Oh, you know, it's like, maybe we should lock the door. You know, like it's basic conversation that helps you do it. And then lastly, rehearsal. I mean, it's never lastly, but rehearsal. A lot of people don't understand that rehearsal doesn't necessarily have to be the actions on. Like, you don't have to go through the motions physically. You can take a piece of paper and look at a map and talk your family through procedure and process on that map, and that's a map recon. That map recon is part of a rehearsal plan. You're creating visual, illustrative context. You're creating a story arc, so your children and people around you who, as soon as you forget or as soon as you leave the table and they're watching Netflix, they'll forget about it. So I think the best way to do is keep it simple, stupid, and create cheat cards. I mean, it's not like we're downrange and we're at risk of compromising a GOS or a grid overhead sector sketch or, you know, classified information. You could create a cheat card for your family that your kids keep in a fanny pack or keep in their top drawer. If crap hits the fan, go to the Ranger handbook that your family made that talks about family preparation and all the things you need to do step by step. Because again, this is perishable. And this doesn't often happen. You're going to need a point of reference.
No, that's awesome, Mike. And I like the idea of having it in dead tree format instead of digital, for sure. So I just want to quickly show the website for our friends at WAFT, where our families train. Philip DePino. These guys do stuff that I haven't seen anywhere else for private individuals. It's not cheap, but it's quite an experience. And what I will tell you is that I've watched entire families. So husband and wife, call it 60-ish years old, give or take, son early 20s, daughter 18 years old, and you have a simulation of a situation at a convenience store / gas station at night. And I watched an 18-year-old girl do it flawlessly after seeing nobody. She was the very first person put out there, so there were bad guys that would come up from one angle or another, and during the instruction period, you know, Philip would say, choose safety. So if there's somebody coming around the front of your vehicle and somebody coming around the back, don't try to get in your vehicle. Go back inside where it's safe. And the crazy thing is that her father was one of the last ones to go. He got killed every single rep. He didn't survive a single rep. But what I wanted to make a point of is that afterwards, again, because it's not cheap, but it's great training, they feed people like unbelievable. I'm a food guy, right? And the food solves everything. So the food is absolutely amazing. So I'm walking through, they've got this place where they've got an eating area and you know, food prep, so on and so forth. And I heard one person after another, this is anywhere from a half hour to an hour after they had done their reps, you know, their 10 or 12 reps, and looking at their watches going, holy crap, my heart rate's still 140 beats per minute. So everybody knew that they weren't going to die, but you have UTM rounds going off, so less lethal rounds. You've got guys like Philip and his crew wearing, you know, Tony Blauer's high gear, and the stress level was pretty impressive. It was pretty neat. I did want to add that I forgot to mention this earlier. When Khalid says he doesn't sleep, there's 10 hours difference between here and where he is. And I can message him on Signal, and either he has a team of people working his signal for him, or he doesn't sleep, because he responds within minutes, which is unbelievable. But Sarah, so in this final segment here, is there one mental prep that you can recommend, like a prep step, I guess I should say, that people can start doing immediately to get themselves in that right mindset if, God forbid, they're on the X?
Yeah, I mean, we really like the what if game. You know, you're in the mall and you're there with, I don't know, two of your family members. You say, what if a shooter comes in here right now? Like, what are we going to do? What do we have on us? Where can we go? You know, a lot of people are in a mindset like, I got to go out the way I came, or I got to go out the entrances I know. But every store has a door at the back, right? People died this way in Africa in malls because they didn't consider it, right? So when you play these games and you walk through these scenarios, you think of things you wouldn't have thought of. If you do it with other people, it's better because they think of things you wouldn't have thought of, right? So the more you can play that game, the more you've at least done some sort of rehearsals of different things that can happen, right? Obviously, we're talking about an airline plot, right? So what if you're in the airport, right? And you see someone who has some of these indicators of a suicide bomber, what do, right? Have that discussion, talk through it. What do you do if you see surveillance, right? What does it even look like? Maybe I should do some research on what terrorist surveillance has looked like over the time, or look at some old case studies, right? Anything you can do like that to think through and have gone through it in your head, when it does happen, it's so much easier to flag like something's wrong. I've seen this before, and now I have a plan and know what to do.
That's awesome advice, Sarah. So is there one thing that you would like people to take with them after tonight, Sarah? Like one thing, whether they're a parent or not, one takeaway from tonight?
Yeah, it's just, we're lucky that we have time to prepare, that we know of this plot in advance, right? They didn't have that in 9/11. They didn't have that in Israel. So take advantage of every minute, because when shit hits the fan, you're going to feel so much better that you put in extra time and effort, especially with your family, to prepare, and you're going to get through it. You're going to be resilient. And that's what it's about. We're trying to save as many lives as possible.
No, great advice. Thank you. Khalid, just because, again, you're in that part of the world close to terrorism central, what's one way that terrorists see us as Americans that we completely miss?
Weak. Terrorists believe the American public is weak, because what the American public was in the 70s and 80s, it isn't now.
True.
And the problem that you've got is everyone is buried inside their phone, so you don't notice things around you. That situational awareness is gone. I remember when as kids, when we would go out, my dad's head would be on a swivel. He'd be looking around, who's where, is there anything that I should worry about? Now, that doesn't exist. And kids themselves, the attention span is not there. I am scared to death of what is going to happen to the next generation of Americans, because 9/11 not only hardened a lot of people, but it weakened a lot of people, because you thought the government was going to protect you in every sense of the way. And you gave up the basic things that you used to learn in school. Physical fitness doesn't exist anymore. Basic exercise doesn't exist anymore. Going out for a walk doesn't exist anymore. That basic thing that we all did as kids, nobody does anymore, because it's not something that this generation thinks about. The idea that you can pick up this thing and sit and argue with someone who's lived a 50, 60-year life about something that you've never ever seen and think you're right, that's what the terrorist is counting on. And that's what they're playing on.
That's the whole Google thing, right? We don't have to get into Google and the CIA, but we have a large number of people in our society now will look something up on Google and they're an automatic subject matter expert. And yeah, it's ridiculous. Mike, one tactical mistake to avoid in chaos.
One tactical mistake to avoid in chaos. Don't outrun your headlights. A lot of people, again, emulate or virtue signal their capability. But as we've described, the GWAT veteran being the most capable because of their experience, many people who have technical skill sets they develop on a flat range in a gym in these isolated, comfortable environments is not the same. And so I'm not saying don't defend your family, defend yourself. I'm saying in this type of scenario, which is the worst case, and we haven't even evolved the worst case. I think it's the left side of a spectrum of lots of different options in worst case. Don't outrun your headlights. Focus on you, your individual safety, because you'll need you to protect your family and get out of harm's way. If that is the X because you're on it, the best way to survive is get off of it, create as much distance, which equals time, and as many obstacles as you can in between the X and where you're located.
Well, I mean, I know you started out with a power outage earlier, and I don't know why Khalid said all that stuff about you, but I think you're pretty smart, Mike. I mean, Khalid's comments aside, you know, can't trust that guy at all. So before we wrap up here, just a couple of quick things. We've got some documents in the SITREP that Khalid and I developed together. This is a one-pager on preparing for the unthinkable. So one page. You could always print this off, put it on your fridge, something like that. I've got a longer one that's up there for download as well. And this goes through the beginning of detecting a terrorist attack all the way through to after the attack. Highly encourage you to go have a look at that. Again, it's, if you go to today's SITREP, just scroll to the bottom and you'll find all of the downloads and links down here at the bottom. And the next part, we've started to do the hero of the day. And I want to give a shout out to two particular people today. So pretty famous guy when it comes to Benghazi. So Boone, as you would know him, and Sarah knows him well.
My partner.
So I didn't put this in the brief for a very specific reason, but I would like to put Sarah on as well as the co-hero of the day, because without getting into all the details, Sarah has literally put her safety at risk to bring all of us this information. So her and Boone, you know, kudos from the Survival Dispatch team. Appreciate everything that y'all do. And the very last thing, just to briefly allude to this, Khalid and I have put together a 144 episode series. So 12 story arcs with 12 episodes under each story arc, covering everything from the Road to 9/11 2.0, which we completed. We've now got 2 of the prepping and survival before, during, and after 9/11. So we've done 14 out of 144 episodes. Stay tuned. I sent it to Mike and asked him if he could maybe polish it up a little bit, but we'll be releasing that soon. So you've got another 132 episodes, 132? No, 130 episodes left to put up with us discussing this topic. But I'm trying to think what day of the week is. It's Wednesday. Okay. Yeah. We'll be back tomorrow night. Jeff, Randy, Khalid, and I for the next episode in this series. Between now and then, please like, share, comment, subscribe. God bless America. Thank you to everybody on the panel tonight. You're greatly appreciated. And for everybody else out there, enjoy the closing video. It is a brand new one.
My son was one of the Marines that died yesterday. And that feckless, dementia-ridden piece of crap just sent my son to die.